The child in the storm. The storm had no mercy. It came down from the mountains like a living thing, howling, raging, devouring everything in its path. Rain lashed the forest in relentless sheets, each drop striking leaves and stone with sharp, stinging force. The wind tore through the trees, bending ancient trunks and ripping loose branches that crashed to the ground like falling spears. Thunder followed deep, violent, and unending. It did not roll so much as break, shattering the sky into fragments of sound that echoed across the valley. Lightning split the darkness again and again, illuminating the world in brief, blinding flashes, revealing a forest that looked less like a place of life and more like something abandoned by it. No traveler remained on the mountain paths. Those with sense had turned back hours ago, seeking shelter before the storm swallowed the land. Even the hardiest merchants, the boldest adventurers, and the most stubborn wanderers had long since vanished from the road. All save one. Kale staggered forward through the mud, each step a battle. His boots sank deep with every movement, the earth beneath him softened into a treacherous mire by the relentless rain. His cloak, once thick, once warm, was soaked through, clinging heavily to his shoulders and dragging him down with its weight. Water dripped from his hair, ran into his eyes, blurred his vision. He wiped at his face, but it made no difference. Everything was wet, everything was cold. Everything hurt. Should have stayed in the village, he muttered under his breath, though the wind stole the words before they could go far. Could have waited it out, but no, someone had to deliver the message. His voice carried a trace of bitterness, but not anger. He had never been particularly good at anger. Kale wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even particularly brave. He was a courier, a man who carried letters between places that most people forgot existed. Messages from farmers to distant kin, notices from minor officials, small pieces of news that never reached the grand halls of kings or the pages of history. He lived in the spaces between importance. And he was used to it. Still, as another crack of thunder split the sky above him, Kale couldn't help but feel the familiar weight settle in his chest, the quiet, persistent reminder of just how small he was. The storm didn't care who he was. The mountains didn't care if he lived or died. The world would continue, vast and indifferent, no matter what became of him. He pulled his cloak tighter around himself, though it did little to keep out the cold. I just need to reach the next shelter, he told himself, just a little further. He had passed an old hunting cabin on this route once before. It wasn't much, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it would be enough to keep the worst of the storm at bay. If he could find it. If the storm hadn't taken it. If he didn't lose his way first. Kale lowered his head and pressed on. The path had all but vanished beneath the mud and flowing water, but he knew the direction. He always knew the direction. It was the one thing he was good at, finding his way, even when the road itself disappeared. So he walked, step after step, one foot in front of the other, until he heard it. At first, he thought it was the wind. The storm made all kinds of sounds, whispers, screams, distant echoes that twisted and changed as they passed through the trees. It wasn't uncommon to imagine hearing things that weren't there. But this was different. Kale stopped. The sudden stillness felt unnatural, as though the world itself had paused. The rain continued. The wind howled. The thunder roared. And beneath it all, a sound, so soft it barely existed. A whimper. Kale frowned, turning his head slightly as he listened. For a moment there was nothing. Then, there it was again. A cry, faint, fragile. Not humans. Not quite. Hello, Kale called, his voice uncertain, carried away almost instantly by the storm. The crying came again. Closer this time. Or perhaps clearer. He couldn't tell. Kale hesitated. Every instinct he had screamed at him to keep moving. This was how people died in the mountains. They strayed from the path. They chased strange sounds. They wandered into places they didn't understand. The mountains were old. Older than the roads carved into them, older than the villages that clung to their edges, older perhaps than the kingdoms themselves. And in places like this, there were stories. Stories of things that watched from the trees. Of voices that called out in the night. Of travelers who followed them. And were never seen again. Kale swallowed, his gaze drifting into the dark forest beyond the path. "This is a bad idea," he said quietly. The storm answered with another crash of thunder. Then, the cry came again. Small, afraid, alone. Kale closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling slowly. Of course, he muttered, because he knew himself. Knew that he would not walk away. No matter how foolish it was. No matter how dangerous. He opened his eyes again and stepped off the path. The forest swallowed him almost immediately. Branches clawed at his cloak, snagging on the wet fabric as he pushed through them. Roots twisted beneath his feet, half hidden beneath the mud, threatening to trip him with every step. The ground sloped unevenly, forcing him to move carefully to avoid slipping. The crying guided him. Soft, uncertain, but constant. Kale moved toward it one cautious step at a time. Hey, he called again, softer now. It's all right, I'm here. He wasn't sure why he said it. He wasn't sure who or what he was speaking to. But the words felt right. The forest grew denser the further he went. The canopy above blocked what little light remained, turning the world into a shifting pattern of shadow and lightning. The storm seemed louder here, the wind funneling between the trees, amplifying every sound. And yet, the crying cut through it all. Clearer now. Closer. Kale's heart began to beat faster. Almost there, he murmured. He pushed past a cluster of low branches and nearly slipped as the ground suddenly dipped beneath him. He caught himself against a rock, steadying his balance. And then he saw it. A hollow, nestled between two large stones, partially sheltered from the worst of the rain. And inside, something moved. Kale froze. Lightning flashed. And for a brief, blinding moment, the world was revealed. Curled against the rock, trembling beneath the rain, was a child. Kale's breath caught in his throat. It was small, far smaller than he had expected. Its body was curled tightly in on itself, as though it were trying to disappear. Thin limbs wrapped around its torso, tail coiled protectively, wings folded close to its back. Wings! Kale blinked. For a moment, his mind refused to understand what he was seeing. But the next flash of lightning left no room for doubt. They were real. Small, no larger than his forearm, but unmistakable. Membranous, delicate, and attached to a body covered not in skin, but in scales. Pale silver scales that shimmered faintly beneath the layer of mud and rain, catching the light in a way that made them seem almost luminous. The child's head lifted slightly, and Kale saw its eyes. Large, bright, filled with tears. They snapped toward him the moment he moved. The crying stopped. Silence fell between them. For a single fragile heartbeat. Neither moved. Neither breathed. Then, the child flinched. It recoiled sharply, pressing itself back against the stone, its wings tightening against its body as if trying to shield itself. A small, broken hiss escaped its throat, weak, unsteady, more fear than threat. Kale's heart clenched. Hey, he stopped himself. The last thing he wanted was to scare it further. Slowly, very slowly, he raised his hands, palms open. Hey, it's okay, he said, his voice low and gentle. I'm not going to hurt you. The child didn't understand the words. That much was clear. But it understood the tone. The lack of aggression. Still, it trembled. Every muscle in its small body was tense, ready to flee even though it had nowhere to go. It tried to stand. And failed. Its limbs slipped on the wet stone, its balance lost almost immediately. It collapsed back into the mud with a small, pained cry. Kale's chest tightened painfully. You're hurt, he whispered. The realization settled over him slowly. This wasn't just a lost creature. It was injured, alone, and trapped in the middle of a storm that could easily kill it. Kale took a step forward. The reaction was immediate. The child recoiled further, pressing itself so tightly against the stone that it seemed to be trying to merge with it. Its eyes widened, pupils dilating, fear radiating from it so strongly that Kale could almost feel it. He stopped. Immediately. Okay, he said softly, okay, I won't come closer. He crouched instead, lowering himself to the ground to appear smaller, less threatening. I won't touch you, he continued, his voice calm despite the pounding of his heart. Not unless you want me to. The storm roared around them, but in that small hollow, something else began to take shape. A fragile, uncertain stillness. The child continued to tremble. The cold was getting to it. Kale could see it clearly now, the way its movements had slowed, the way its breathing came in short, shallow bursts. Its scales, though beautiful, were slick with rain, offering little protection against the chill. If it stayed here, it would die. Kale exhaled slowly. Stubborn little thing, he murmured. He reached up and unclasped his cloak. The fabric peeled away from his shoulders with a wet, heavy sound. The moment it left him, the cold hit harder, biting into his skin with renewed force. He ignored it. Carefully, deliberately, he placed the cloak on the ground between them. Then he stepped back. There, he said, no tricks. The child stared at the cloak. Then at him. Then back again. It didn't move. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a shiver ran through its body. Stronger than before. More violent. Its teeth, small, sharp, clicked together faintly. Kale said nothing. He didn't move. He simply waited. And after what felt like an eternity, the child shifted. Slowly, hesitantly, it loosened its grip on the rock and crawled forward, each movement cautious, uncertain, as though expecting the world to punish it for the attempt. Kale held his breath. The child reached the cloak. It paused, sniffed it, then, with a sudden, desperate motion, it grabbed the fabric and pulled it around itself, clutching it tightly, as if it were the only warmth left in the world. Kale let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. There you go, he whispered. The crying didn't stop, but it changed. It softened. The sharp, panicked edge faded, replaced by something quieter. Something safer. Kale slowly lowered himself to the ground, sitting in the mud a short distance away. The cold seeped into him almost instantly, but he ignored it. You can cry, he said gently. Storms are scary. The child looked at him again. Really looked this time. Not just with fear, but with something else. Something curious. Something uncertain. Its grip on the cloak tightened slightly. And for the first time since he found it, it didn't pull away. A fragile trust. The storm passed. Not all at once, not with a sudden, merciful calm. It faded slowly, reluctantly, like a beast unwilling to release its grip on the world. The thunder grew distant first, its violent cracks softening into low, grumbling echoes that rolled across the mountains. The lightning followed, flashing less often, its brilliance dimmed behind thinning clouds. But the rain lingered. It fell in softer sheets now, no longer lashing but steady, persistent. Droplets slid from leaves in quiet rhythms, dripping from branches and stones, turning the forest into a world of constant, whispering sound. And when at last the rain eased, the cold remained. It seeped into everything. Into the ground, into the air, into bone and breath. Night settled heavily over the forest, thick and unbroken. Without the storm's fury to mask it, the silence that followed felt unnatural, too deep, too complete. The kind of silence that made every small sound seem too loud. Too exposed. Kale moved carefully beneath a rocky overhang, his boots squelching softly in the damp earth. The shelter wasn't much, a slanted formation of stone that jutted out just enough to block the wind from one side, but it was better than nothing. Better than standing in the open. Better than leaving the child where he had found it. He had chosen this place quickly, guided more by instinct than thought. Somewhere dry, somewhere enclosed enough to trap a bit of warmth, somewhere that felt safe. Though as he looked around, he couldn't quite say why. There was nothing here but stone, damp earth, and shadow. Still, it would do. Kale knelt, setting down the small bundle of sticks he had gathered. His fingers were numb, stiff from cold and wet, but he worked carefully, arranging the wood into a small, deliberate pile. He had done this countless times before. Traveling alone meant learning how to survive the small things. How to make fire from damp wood. How to find shelter where none was obvious. How to keep moving when his body begged him to stop. It wasn't heroism. It was necessity. He struck the flint. Once, twice, On the third attempt, a spark caught. It flickered weakly at first, barely visible against the darkness, but Kale leaned closer, shielding it with his hands, feeding it gently. "Come on," he murmured, "don't give up on me now." The flame wavered. Then, it grew, small at first, then stronger. The fire took hold. Kale let out a slow breath, tension easing from his shoulders as warmth began to spread outward in faint, fragile waves. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He leaned back slightly, watching the flames dance, their light casting shifting shadows across the stone walls. And then, he became aware of the gaze. It hadn't left him. Not once. Kale turned his head slowly. The child sat just beyond the reach of the firelight, wrapped tightly in his cloak. The fabric nearly swallowed its small form, draping over its shoulders and pooling around it like a protective shell. Its eyes were fixed on him, unblinking, watching, studying, every movement, every breath, as if trying to understand what he was. Kale offered a small, tentative smile. "First time seeing a human?" he asked. The child tilted its head. The motion was slight but unmistakably curious. Kale huffed softly, shaking his head. "Yeah, same for me," he admitted. He shifted his gaze back to the fire, poking at it gently with a stick to keep the flames alive. "Dragons." He had heard the stories, of course, everyone had. Stories told in hushed voices around hearth fires. Stories passed down through generations, growing larger, more terrifying with each telling. Dragons were ancient, powerful, unstoppable. They ruled the skies, it was said. Entire kingdoms had risen and fallen beneath their shadows. Their breath could melt stone, their wings could summon storms, their mere presence could turn armies to ash. They were not creatures one simply encountered. And yet, here one was, small, shivering, sniffling quietly as it clutched a borrowed cloak like a lifeline. Kale glanced at it again, something soft and disbelieving settling in his chest. "Not exactly what I expected," he murmured. The child made a faint sound, something between a sniffle and a soft chirp. It shifted slightly, adjusting the cloak around itself, pulling it tighter as though afraid it might disappear if it let go. Kale's expression softened. "Hey, it's all right," he said gently. "You're safe here." He wasn't sure if that was true, but the words felt important. The child didn't respond, not in any way he could understand. But it didn't look away. Didn't retreat. That was enough. Kale turned his attention back to the fire, feeding it another small piece of wood. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said after a moment. "This forest's no place for, well, anyone really." He hesitated, glancing at the child again. "What are you anyway?" he added quietly. "A hatchling, is that what they call you?" The child blinked slowly. Its gaze flickered not with understanding but with attention. It was listening, even if it didn't know the words. Kale sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. "Where are your parents, Hov?" he asked. The reaction was immediate. The child stiffened. Its body went rigid beneath the cloak, wings tightening instinctively against its back. Its gaze dropped, and from its throat came the faintest whimper. Small, broken. Kale winced, the sound striking him harder than he expected. "Right," he said quickly, regret lacing his voice. "Bad question." He looked away, giving the child space. "I didn't mean to," he started, then stopped. There wasn't much point explaining. The damage was done. Silence stretched between them. Not hostile, not tense, but heavy. The kind of silence that lingered after something fragile had been disturbed. Kale focused on the fire, adding another stick, watching the flames rise and fall. He didn't speak again. Didn't push. Didn't ask more questions. Some things were better left alone. Time passed. He wasn't sure how much. Minutes, maybe longer. The forest remained quiet. Too quiet. No insects. No distant calls of animals. Nothing but the faint crackle of the fire and the soft drip of water from the trees outside. It made his skin crawl. Kale shifted slightly, glancing out into the darkness beyond their small shelter. Something about it felt wrong. Not dangerous. Not yet, but watchful, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. He frowned, unease settling in his chest. Probably just my imagination, he muttered. It wouldn't be the first time. Traveling alone had a way of making a man see things that weren't there. Hear things that didn't exist. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to relax. The fire was warm. The shelter was dry. For now, that was enough. A small movement caught his attention. Kale turned his head. The child had shifted closer. Not much, just a few inches, but enough that the edge of the firelight touched the cloak wrapped around it. Kale blinked. You want to sit here? He asked, gesturing lightly toward the space beside him. The child hesitated. Its eyes flicked to him, then to the fire, then back again. It made a soft, uncertain sound. And then, slowly, it moved. Each step was careful, deliberate, as though expecting something to go wrong. But nothing did. The fire didn't lash out. Kale didn't move suddenly. The world remained still. And at last, the child reached him. It paused, for just a moment. Then, it leaned against his side. Kale froze. The contact was unexpected. Warm, far warmer than he would have thought possible. The heat radiating from the small body seeped through his damp clothes, a stark contrast to the cold that had settled deep into his bones. For a moment, he didn't know what to do. His hands hovered awkwardly at his sides, unsure whether to move or remain still. He could feel the child's tension, the way it held itself ready to pull away at the slightest provocation. Carefully, very carefully, Kale moved his hand. He rested it gently against the child's back. The reaction was immediate. The child flinched. Its muscles tightened, wings twitching beneath the cloak. Kale stilled. Easy, he murmured softly, it's just me. He didn't move his hand. Didn't press. Didn't grip. He simply let it rest there. A quiet, steady presence. The child remained tense for a moment longer. Then, slowly, it relaxed. Just a little. It didn't pull away. Kale exhaled softly, relief easing through him. There you go, he whispered. They stayed like that, side by side. The fire crackled softly, its warmth spreading in gentle waves. Shadows flickered across the stone walls, shifting with each movement of the flame. The wind outside had softened to a low whisper, brushing against the edges of the overhang but no longer howling. And in that small, fragile pocket of warmth, something changed. The child's breathing began to slow. The sharp, uneven rhythm of fear softened into something steadier. Calmer. Its grip on the cloak loosened slightly, though it never let go entirely. Every so often, it let out a soft, lingering sniffle. But the crying, the desperate, broken crying that had filled the storm, was gone. Kale felt it before he fully realized it. The shift, the quiet. Hey, he murmured softly. The child didn't respond. He glanced down. Its eyes were closed. Its body had gone still. Not tense, not afraid, but resting. Asleep. Kale blinked. Well, he whispered, that was fast. A faint, tired smile touched his lips. Carefully, he adjusted his posture, making sure not to disturb the small creature leaning against him. Guess I'm not going anywhere tonight, he murmured. Not that he had much choice. Leaving now would mean waking it, disturbing it, and after everything, it had finally found a moment of peace. He wasn't about to take that away. So he stayed, sitting there in the dim firelight, one hand resting gently against the child's back, listening to the quiet rhythm of its breathing. Time stretched. The night deepened. And slowly, the warmth of the fire, the stillness of the moment, the exhaustion that had been building in his body all day. It all began to weigh on him. But Kale didn't sleep. He couldn't. Something kept him awake. A feeling, a quiet, persistent unease that refused to fade. He lifted his gaze, looking out beyond the shelter. The forest was dark. Too dark. The kind of darkness that swallowed shapes, that turned familiar forms into something unrecognizable. But it wasn't the darkness that unsettled him. It was the silence. There should have been something. Anything. The chirp of insects. The rustle of small animals. The distant call of something moving through the trees. But there was nothing. Not even the wind seemed willing to disturb the stillness beyond the firelight. Kale frowned, his grip on the stick tightening slightly. "This place isn't right," he whispered. He couldn't explain it. Couldn't point to anything specific. But the feeling lingered. Heavy. Watching. Waiting. As if the forest itself were aware of him. Of them. He glanced down at the child, still sleeping peacefully against his side. Unawares. Trusting. The thought sent a strange, protective feeling through his chest. "Don't worry," he murmured quietly, "I've got you." The words came unbidden. Instinctive. And once spoken. They felt like a promise. Kale looked back out into the darkness. His eyes narrowed slightly. "If anything's out there," he added under his breath, "it'll have to go through me first." He didn't know why he said it. He wasn't strong. Wasn't skilled in combat. If something truly dangerous came, he wouldn't stand a chance. But still, he meant it. Completely. The fire crackled softly beside him. The child slept warm and steady. And Kale kept watch. Minutes passed. Then hours. The night stretched on slow and endless. And yet, the feeling never left. If anything, it grew stronger. Kale's gaze drifted upward. Beyond the trees. Beyond the darkness. To where the clouds still lingered, thin and shifting. And for just a moment, he thought he saw something. A shadow. Massive. Moving across the sky. Gone as quickly as it appeared. Kale's breath caught. "No," he whispered, "that's just the clouds." It had to be. There was nothing else it could be. And yet, he didn't look away. Because deep down, somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the uncertainty, he knew they were not alone. And far above, beyond the reach of firelight, beyond the sight of ordinary men, something ancient stirred. Watching, waiting, for the moment it would descend. The Emperor's fury. The sky split open at dawn. Not with light, not with warmth, but with fire. It came without warning, no gentle transition, no slow easing of night into day. One moment the world was still cloaked in darkness, the faintest hint of gray creeping along the horizon. The next, the heavens burned. A roar tore through the mountains. It wasn't sound as Kale understood it. It was something deeper, something older. A force that didn't simply echo through the air but shook it, ripping through the sky and crashing into the earth with enough power to make the world itself tremble. Snow broke loose from distant peaks, cascading downward in massive avalanches. Trees shuddered violently, leaves tearing free in swirling bursts. Birds exploded from the canopy in frantic, disorganized flight, their cries sharp with terror. And the beasts. The beasts did not run. They hid. They burrowed into the ground, fled into dens, pressed themselves into the deepest shadows they could find. Creatures that would normally fight, hunt, defend their territory, now sought only to disappear. To survive. Kale's eyes snapped open. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The world was noise. The roar, the trembling earth, the violent rush of air. It crashed over him in a wave, tearing him from sleep so abruptly that his mind couldn't keep pace. Then reality returned. The fire reduced to glowing embers. The rocky overhang dim in the fatting darkness. And the small, warm weight pressed against his side. The child. It stirred, shifting slightly, its grip tightening instinctively on his cloak. A soft, confused sound escaped it, not fear, not yet, but uncertainty. Kale sucked in a breath. "What was that?" he whispered. The answer came immediately. The world darkened. Not gradually. Not subtly. Instantly. As if something vast had moved between the land and the sky, blocking out what little light the dawn had begun to offer. Kale felt it before he saw it. A pressure. Heavy. overwhelming, like the air itself had grown too thick to breathe. Slowly, almost against his will, he looked up and forgot how to breathe. It was there, above them, a shape so enormous it defied understanding. At first, his mind tried to make sense of it, tried to fit it into something familiar. A cloud, a shadow, a trick of the fatting storm. But it moved. Wings. Gods, the wings. They stretched across the sky, vast beyond reason, each beat sending ripples through the air that Kale could feel in his bones. The sheer force of it bent the treetops, flattening branches, scattering debris in every direction. Light caught along its bodies. Not soft, not reflective, but burning. Its scales glowed like molten gold, each one radiating heat and brilliance as though forged in the heart of a star. They shifted as it moved, catching the dim light of dawn and turning it into something blinding, something impossible to look at directly. And its eyes, even from this distance, Kale could see them. Two blazing points of light. Ancient, endless, furious. A dragon. No, the word felt small. Inadequate. This was not the kind of creature the stories spoke of, not the beasts that circled castles or burned villages. This was something else. Something older than those stories. Something the stories had feared. The god. The realization struck him with absolute certainty. The dragon emperors. He didn't know how he knew. No one had ever described it in such detail. No tale could have captured the sheer presence of the being above him. And yet, there was no doubt. Power radiated from it in waves, suffocating and absolute. It pressed down on the forest, on the mountains, on him, like an invisible weight threatening to crush everything beneath it. And then, it looked at him. There was no movement of the head, no dramatic shift. Just attention. And suddenly, Kale knew. He was seen. Fully. Completely. Every flaw, every weakness, every insignificant detail of his existence laid bare beneath that gaze. Kale's heart stopped. "Oh," he whispered. Beside him, the child stirred. It shifted, blinking sleep from its eyes, its small body still warm against his side. For a moment, it seemed confused, unaware of the weight bearing down on them. Then, it looked up, and everything changed. The fear Kale expected, the instinctive terror that every living creature had shown, never came. Instead, the child made a small, excited sound. A chirp. Bright. Happy. Kale blinked. Oh, wait. Before he could react, the child scrambled to its feet. The cloak slipped slightly from its shoulders, but it didn't seem to notice. Its eyes were fixed on the sky, wide with something that looked dangerously close to joy. And then, it ran. Wait, Kale lunged forward, his hand reaching out instinctively. Stop. Too late. The child leapt. Its small wings spread, fragile, delicate, utterly insufficient for flight. And for a single horrifying moment, Kale thought it was about to fall. But it didn't. Because the world responded. The massive shape above them shifted. Descending. Slowly. Carefully. The air itself seemed to part for it, bending around its movement. The force of its wings lessened, controlled now, deliberate. The storm that had clung to it began to dissipate, drawn inward as though the creature itself were the source. The earth trembled as it landed. Not violently, not destructively, but with a weight that spoke of something far beyond mortal scale. Trees bent, stone cracked. The ground sank slightly beneath its claws. And yet, it was controlled, measured, nothing like the overwhelming fury of its arrival. The child reached it first, and the impossible happened. The Dragon Emperor lowered its head. Not in dominance, not in threat, but gently, carefully, like handling something fragile beyond measure. The child chirped again, louder this time, pressing itself against the massive snout. Its small body leaned into the golden scales without hesitation, without fear. And the emperors allowed it. More than that, it responded. A low, rumbling sound escaped it, not a roar, not a growl, but something softer, something that vibrated through the air like distant thunder. Recognition. Relief. Kale stared, his mind struggling to keep up. You've got to be kidding me, he breathed. Because there was only one explanation. Only one possibility that made sense of what he was seeing. The cloak. The warmth. The child's fear of being alone. The silence of the forest. The shadow in the sky. All of it. It came together in a single, terrifying realization. The Dragon Emperor's gaze shifted. Back to him. And everything changed. The warmth, the gentleness, vanished, replaced by something ancient. Something vast. Something that had no place for mercy. The air grew heavy. Too heavy. Kale's breath hitched, his lungs struggling against the invisible weight pressing down on him. His knees threatened to buckle, his body instinctively trying to lower itself to submit to survive. And then, the voice came. Not through the air. Not through sound. It appeared inside his mind. Deep, resonant, impossible to ignore. You touched what is mine. Kale's vision blurred. The pressure intensified, crushing against him from all sides. It felt like standing beneath a collapsing mountain, like the very fabric of the world had decided he did not belong within it. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to speak. I didn't know, he managed, his voice barely more than a whisper. The weight pressed harder. That is my heir. The word struck him like a physical blow. There? Of course. Of course it was. Because his luck had never been anything less than spectacularly terrible. Kale let out a weak, almost hysterical breath. Right, he said faintly, naturally. His vision swam, black creeping in at the edges. His body was beginning to give out, his strength fatting under the relentless pressure. He was going to die. Here, now, for an act of kindness he hadn't even understood. It figured. The child moved suddenly, as if only now noticing the tension. It turned, its gaze shifting between Kale and the Emperor, confusion flickering across its small features. It chirped again, softer this time. Then, it ran, back toward him. Kale barely had time to process it before the small creature reached him. Its tiny claws closed around his hand, gripping tightly. And then, it pulled, toward the Emperor. Kale froze. No, he whispered, no, absolutely not. The child tugged harder. Insistent. Determined. The Emperor watched. Silent. Waiting. Kale's heart pounded in his chest. He had two choices. Run, then die. Or walk, and probably still die. He closed his eyes briefly, a tired, resigned expression crossing his face. I hate everything, he muttered. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. Each movement felt impossibly heavy, his body resisting with every instinct it had. The closer he drew, the stronger the pressure became, until it felt like his very existence was being weighed, measured, judged. When he finally stopped, he couldn't look up. Couldn't bring himself to meet that gaze. The child chirped happily beside him, nudging his side as if encouraging him, as if proud. As if presenting him. Kale closed his eyes. I kept it warm, he said quietly, that's all. The words felt small, insignificant, but they were the truths. He had done nothing more, nothing less. Silence followed, heavy, endless. Then, the pressure eased. Not gone, never gone, but less. Kale's breath returned in a sharp gasp, his lungs finally able to draw air again. Slowly, carefully, he looked up. The Dragon Emperor studied him. Not with fury, not anymore, but with something else. Something deeper. Judgment. You gave without knowings. Kale said nothing. What was there to say? It was true. You stayed when others would flee. The child leaned against him again as if proving the point. Its small body pressed warmly against his side, utterly unafraid. The Emperor's gaze lingered on that. And for the briefest moment, something shifted. The overwhelming weight of its presence softened. Just a fraction. You may live. Relief hit Kale so hard his knees nearly gave out. He exhaled shakily, tension draining from his body all at once. "Thank you," he whispered. Then, the Emperor spoke again. "You will remain." Kale blinked. "What?" The single word came out flat. "Uncomprehendings." The Emperor's eyes gleamed. "Ancient, knowing, my heir has chosen you." The child chirped proudly, tightening its grip on his hand as if in agreement. Kale stared at it, then at the Emperor's, then back again. "Chosen me for what?" he asked weakly. The answer came like thunder. "To stay." Kale felt something in his chest drop. "I was just trying to get through the storm," he said, his voice faint. The Emperor's wings unfurled. The movement alone sent waves of air rushing outward, bending trees and scattering debris. "You walked into something greater." The words echoed in his mind. "Final, unyieldings." The child tugged his hand again. But this time, Kale didn't resist. What was the point? There was no path back. No return to the quiet, insignificant life he had known. That life had ended the moment he stepped off the road. The moment he chose not to walk away. He looked down at the child. Small, warm, trusting, and for a moment, just a moment, he smiled. "You really don't make things easy, do you?" he murmured. The child chirped softly. And somehow, that was enough. The Dragon Emperor rose. Its wings bait once, twice, and the world fell away beneath them. The forest shrank. The mountains receded. The sky opened wide and endless around them. Kale felt the ground vanish beneath his feet, felt himself lifted by forces far beyond his understanding. He didn't fight it. Couldn't. Wouldn't. And as the wind rushed past him, as the world became something distant and small, a single thought echoed through his mind. All of this impossible, terrifying, overwhelming moment, had begun with something so simple. A choice. To stop. To listen. To care. And now, that choice had bound him to something far beyond anything he had ever known. To the Dragon Emperor. To its heir. To a destiny he had never sought. And far above the world he once understood. The human courier vanished into legend.